It was a cold December evening in 1933 as Cal Huffman finished up the last rounds on his farm. The sun was just beginning to slip behind the hills of Botetourt County, Virginia, and the crisp night air bit at Huffman's face as he wiped the dirt from his hands, walking back toward his home. Inside, his wife and children were settling down for the night, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. As Cal stepped into the warmth of the house, he could feel the comfort of routine taking over. The fire crackled in the hearth, a faint scent of dinner still lingered in the air, and the cold wind rattled the windows, signaling the onset of winter. But then, just as he was about to sit down, something changed. It started subtly. A faint, almost metallic smell began to creep through the room. Cal sniffed the air, thinking maybe the fire had caught something strange. But within moments, the smell grew sharper, more intense, burning at his nostrils and throat. His eyes began to water. His wife called out from the other room, her voice panicked, asking if he smelled it too. The children coughed, confused and scared. His eyes darted about the room, his heart beginning to pound. He checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked tight. He opened them, hoping for a gust of fresh air, but the smell seemed to cling to the inside of the house. Cal began to feel strange, his skin starting to tingle, and he realized the situation was more dire than he'd first thought. He rushed outside to scan the darkness around the house, but the night was still. Too still. No movement, no sounds, no sign of anyone. But this was only the beginning of one of the most terrifying nights of Cal Huffman's life. Join us as we examine the Mad Gasser of Botetourt County. Outside, the cold cut straight through Cal's clothes as he peered into the stillness of the farm. His breath hung in the air in small clouds, but the night gave no answers, no footsteps, no rustling leaves, nothing. The world outside had frozen, waiting for something to happen. Then came the sound, a faint clinking, like metal tapping against glass. Cal's heart skipped a beat. He turned toward the windows where his wife and children stood inside, fear etched on their faces. The sound came again, louder this time. It seemed to be coming from the side of the house, near the window where what he now knew must have been some kind of gas first crept in. Without thinking, Cal moved toward it, his footsteps silent in the frozen dirt. He rounded the corner of the house with no idea what to expect. A person, some explanation, but there was nothing, just the dark outline of his house against the night. Or was there? Out of the corner of his eye, something shifted. A shadow. A person, perhaps, standing just beyond the tree line. Cal blinked, and the figure was gone, swallowed by the shadows. Before he could react, another wave of that horrible gas hit him. It was stronger now, thick and sour, almost choking him. His lungs burned, his head pounded, and his throat tightened as though something was gripping it from the inside. His vision blurred as he stumbled back toward the house, desperate to escape the suffocating fumes. He returned to a family in chaos. The gas was now seeping in again. The children were coughing uncontrollably, clutching their throats and trying to breathe. His wife's face was swollen, and her eyes were watering as she tried to keep the children calm. Some of his family, too, had seen the shadowy figure creeping about outside. All 8 members of the Huffman family were affected, each one showing signs of the gas's effects: nausea, headaches. Cal's wife complained that her throat felt like it was closing up, the muscles constricting painfully. The youngest of the children clung to their mother, their faces pale and their breathing shallow. Desperate, Cal did what he could to help, but the gas felt like it was everywhere. Closing the windows to block off the gas only seemed to make things worse, but opening them failed to air out the house. Nothing seemed to be able to stop it. As they huddled together, waiting for the next wave, the fire in the hearth dimmed, and the house grew eerily silent, save for the coughing and panicked whispers. Outside, Cal could hear the wind picking up, rattling the old wooden beams of the house. But there was no sign of movement from the windows, no sign of the figure he thought he'd seen earlier. And then, just when it seemed like the night couldn't get worse, the gas hit them again. This time, Cal felt his knees weaken. His head throbbed, and the air around him grew thicker, like he was drowning. The children began to wail, their faces red and puffy, their cries punctuated by coughing fits that only seemed to grow worse with each breath. It was then that Cal made the decision. They couldn't wait any longer. Whoever, whatever was out there wasn't going to stop. They needed help. He picked up the phone and called the police. By the time officers arrived, the newest wave of gas had cleared, but the fear inside the house still hung like a heavy cloud. The Huffman family, pale and shaken, recounted the events. 3 separate attacks in one night, each one more terrifying than the last. The officers inspected the house thoroughly, moving from room to room, but there was nothing out of place. The windows and doors showed no signs of forced entry. Outside, the night remained still, the air cold and biting. Flashlights in hand, the police scoured the property for any clues, anything that might explain what had happened. The farm was vast, and with the darkness pressing in, their search seemed almost hopeless. But then one of them stopped. In the dirt, near the side of the house where Cal had first smelled the gas, a single footprint was visible. It was small, faintly outlined in the frozen ground. The officers crouched down, examining it more closely. It was a woman's shoe print. The discovery only deepened the mystery. Why would a woman be out here in the dead of night, in the freezing cold, terrorizing this family? The print was found near where Cal thought he had seen someone lurking in the shadows, but he was sure the figure he'd glimpsed had been a man. Now nothing seemed certain. The police took note of the footprint but found no other evidence. No gas canisters or other footprints leading away. It was as if the attacker had vanished into thin air. With nothing more to go on, the police could do little but reassure the Huffmans that they would continue to investigate. But as the police car disappeared down the long dirt road, the Huffman family was left with more questions than answers. The only thing they knew for sure was that they weren't safe. Nor were other families in the area who began reporting similar horrifying experiences. On December 24th, just 2 days after the Huffmans' ordeal, the Roberts family, living not far from Haymaker Town, was attacked. The father, George Roberts, had been outside tending to his livestock when he caught a whiff of the same sharp, metallic smell. It was faint at first, but then it struck him with full force, a bitter chemical stench that filled his lungs and left him gasping for air. He stumbled back into the house, his head spinning, only to find that his wife and children were also being overwhelmed by the gas. Just like at the Huffman farm, the family complained of burning throats, nausea, and headaches. Roberts recalled feeling as though his mouth and throat were constricting, making it harder to breathe with each passing second. No one had seen a thing, and just like before, the gas seemed to disappear as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind nothing but confusion and a growing sense of dread. Days later, another family, the Johnsons, reported a similar attack. On the night of December 28th, Sarah Johnson had been sitting by the fire with her husband when the smell hit them. The gas was stronger this time, filling the entire room in an instant. The couple tried to flee the house, but the thick air seemed to cling to them, making their movements sluggish, their heads dizzy. Sarah recalled the gas tightening around her chest, her mouth going dry, her skin feeling hot and swollen. Outside, they swore they saw a figure in the distance, a shadowy shape moving quickly through the trees, disappearing into the darkness. The Johnsons immediately called the authorities, but once again, no clues were found. No footprints, no signs of a break-in. The attacker had come and gone, leaving nothing behind but fear and sickness. As the attacks mounted, so did the symptoms. Several victims reported severe facial swelling, an alarming new development. Their skin would puff up, tightening painfully around their eyes and mouths. Their headaches grew more intense, leaving many bedridden for days after the attacks. But the worst symptom was the sense of constriction, like an invisible force was gripping their throats, making it nearly impossible to speak or breathe. Soon, it seemed that no family in Botetourt County felt safe. People were locking their doors and windows at night, doubling up on security measures. But none of it seemed to matter. The gasser could strike at any time, slipping in and out without a trace. Families that had never felt the need to lock their doors now huddled together at night, waiting for the next attack. Rumors began to spread. Some whispered that it was a madman, a twisted soul bent on terrorizing the town. Others believed there was more to it, something darker, perhaps even supernatural. As the attacks continued and fear gripped the community, the people of Botetourt County began to take matters into their own hands. Armed with rifles and shotguns, groups of men patrolled the back roads at night, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of a stranger. The tension in the air was palpable. Everyone was looking for someone, anyone who didn't belong. On one of those dark nights, a searcher claimed to have seen a figure fleeing into the woods. Without hesitation, he fired his gun into the darkness, but whoever it was vanished before he could get a better look. On another night, shortly after a gas attack, one of the victims managed to rush outside in time to see something strange. 4 men sprinting toward the Blue Ridge Mountains. The witness ran back inside, grabbed a gun, and returned to the yard, but by then, the men were gone. He could still hear their voices, though, echoing in the distance as they disappeared into the night. This particular incident brings to mind the strange phantom attackers of Gloucester, Massachusetts, which we covered on a previous episode. As word spread of these sightings, not everyone was convinced. Some residents, untouched by the gasser, began to express their doubts. Was it all just hysteria? But the victims were real, and so were their symptoms. Local physicians confirmed what they had seen: swollen faces, burning throats, and debilitating headaches. Even County Sheriff C.E. Williamson, a practical man by nature, had no doubt. There was someone, or something out there, using gas to terrorize the people of Botetourt County. The attacks began to spread. A few days later, another incident occurred near Lithia, just over the county line in Roanoke. The victim found something unusual in the snow outside their home, discolored patches that carried a sweet, oily scent. When the substance was analyzed, it was found to contain sulfur, arsenic, and mineral oil, compounds that bore an unsettling resemblance to insecticides. Stranger still was the trail of footprints that led from the house to the barn, only to stop there with no sign of anyone leaving. Like before, the tracks were those of a woman, and then, as quickly as they had begun, the attacks stopped. The gas attacks, the figures in the dark, the mysterious footprints, everything simply ceased. No one was ever caught, and no answers were ever found. The residents of Botetourt County were left to wonder who, or what, had been responsible for those weeks of terror. As the final gas attack in Virginia faded into fearful memory, across the country in another quiet town, a similar wave of terror would grip the streets, and once again the faint imprint of women's shoes would be left behind. Mattoon, Illinois, in the mid-1940s, was a small but bustling Midwestern town with a population of about 15,000. Known for its agricultural roots, the town was surrounded by fertile farmland and dotted with modest homes, shops, and a few manufacturing facilities supporting the wartime economy. Mattoon had a close-knit, family-oriented community typical of small-town America at the time, with quiet neighborhoods, tree-lined streets, and a downtown area that served as the hub of activity. Life in Mattoon was marked by simplicity and routine, making the events which were about to befall the town all the more shocking. On the night of August 31st, 1944, as Mr. Urban Rafe drifted to sleep, something strange began to fill the air of his bedroom. He woke with a start, his body heavy with nausea and his head pounding. Struggling to his feet, he made his way to the bathroom, hoping the sudden sickness would pass. But as he returned to bed, his unease only deepened. The room carried an odd, sickly scent, and as he inhaled, his throat tightened further. He glanced at his wife, panic rising in his throat. "Did you leave the gas on?" he asked, his voice tight. Mrs. Rafe, confused, shook her head. She hadn't touched the stove, but the odor hung thick in the air, bitter and sweet all at once. When she attempted to get up to check, her body refused to respond. Her legs felt as if they had turned to stone, pinning her to the mattress. She tried again, her breath quickening as fear crawled up her spine. She couldn't move. Elsewhere, on the other side of town, another family was touched by the same terror. In the dead of night, a mother was startled awake by the sound of her daughter's violent coughing from another room. She sat up, heart racing, ready to rush to her child's side, but an invisible force seemed to hold her down. Her body, too, was paralyzed, pinned beneath the weight of something unseen. She strained against the sensation, but the harder she fought, the more futile it became. The air in the room was thick, suffocating as her daughter's coughing echoed in the darkness. It was just after 11 p.m. on the next night when Aline Kearney and her young daughter Dorothy settled into bed. The house was quiet, save for the soft murmur of the night outside. But moments after lying down, Aline caught a strange scent in the air. At first it seemed harmless, a faint sweet odor, perhaps from the flowers outside their window. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, the scent grew stronger, filling the room until it became unbearable. Aline's throat began to dry out and an uneasy tightness crept into her chest. She tried to sit up to get out of bed, but couldn't. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get her legs to move. Panic swelled inside her as the numbness spread, and a strangled scream escaped her lips. Her sister, Martha Reedy, visiting from out of town, heard the cry and rushed in from another room. As soon as she entered, the thick, sickly smell hit her too. Without hesitation, Martha bolted next door, pounding on the neighbor's door for help. Earl Robinson, the neighbor, immediately called the police, but by the time they arrived, the air had cleared. The sweet, suffocating odor was gone, leaving only the lingering fear and confusion behind. Later that night, after the police had left, Aline's husband, Bert, returned home. Exhausted, he walked toward the house when something caught his eye. There, just outside the bedroom window, a figure stood motionless in the darkness. It was tall, dressed in dark clothing and a tight-fitting cap that obscured their face. Bert's heart raced as he ran toward the figure, but before he could get close, it disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. In the days that followed the Kearney incident, a wave of attacks swept through Mattoon as several residents began to report similar experiences. They spoke of a sudden infusion of a sickly sweet odor that soon earned the ominous nickname gardenia gas. For some, the effects were immediate and debilitating, leaving them paralyzed for as long as 90 minutes. On September 5th, Bola Cordes and her husband returned home after a long day, the moonlight casting eerie shadows on their path. As they approached the front door, Bola noticed something peculiar, a white cloth carefully positioned on the screen door. Intrigued, she leaned in for a closer look and discovered the center of the cloth was soaked with a strange liquid. Curiosity got the better of her. She brought the cloth closer to her face, inhaling its pungent scent. In an instant, a jolt shot through her body as if she had touched a live wire. It felt like an electric current, she later recounted. The sensation raced down my body to my feet and seemed to settle in my knees. It was a feeling of paralysis. As she nearly collapsed, her husband rushed to her side, helping her stumble inside as her strength ebbed away. Soon, Bola felt her lips swell and crack, pain blossoming in her mouth and throat like fire. Panic gripped her as she began to spit blood, her body reacting violently to the unknown threat. A doctor arrived to treat her symptoms, and within a few hours she began to recover. Determined to uncover the truth, Bola decided to investigate the area around her porch. Among the scattered debris, she found an old worn skeleton key and a mostly empty lipstick tube. Shaken but resolute, she handed over the key, cloth, and lipstick tube to the police. They promptly sent the cloth to the Illinois State Police Laboratory for analysis, yet by the time the lab examined it, the substance had apparently dissipated, leaving only questions and no conclusive results. As midnight approached on the same night of the Cordes attack, a woman's scream pierced the stillness, echoing through the quiet streets. Panicked, she dialed the police to report that a man had tried to force his way through her door. The sound of her terror had frightened him off. The following evening, around 10 p.m., Laura Junkin, who managed a restaurant with an apartment tucked in the back, stepped into her bathroom. It was then that she encountered a scent that sent a chill down her spine, a sickly aroma reminiscent of, quote, cheap perfume, a strong, sweet, flowery scent. As she inhaled, her legs buckled beneath her, and she grasped the sink for support, the room spinning around her as the paralyzing wave washed over her. Not far away, another couple was on high alert, having just reported a suspicious prowler lurking near their home. But only an hour later, their daughter, Glenda Hendershot, awoke, feeling an overwhelming wave of nausea. The parents exchanged worried glances, a silent agreement passing between them. They feared the prowler's presence was somehow connected to their daughter's sudden illness. At 1 a.m., 60-year-old Fred Goebel was jolted awake by violent illness. For the next 2 hours, he fought a relentless wave of extreme nausea. Meanwhile, his neighbor, Robert Daniels, was drawn to the commotion and peered out into the darkness. There he spotted a tall, thin man, darting away from Goebel's house and across his yard, the silhouette disappearing into the night. In the days that followed, the phantom attacker ignited a wave of sensational headlines across the nation. United Press stories brought the unsettling events in Mattoon to the forefront, and with that attention came a growing sense of panic. As the attacks continued to plague the town, frustration boiled over among the residents. Outrage simmered at the local police, who had yet to apprehend the elusive assailant. The situation was dire. The police force was woefully under-equipped, consisting of only 2 officers and 8 patrolmen, their cars lacking the vital communication radios that could have coordinated their efforts. As whispers of fear echoed through the streets, Police Commissioner Thomas Wright stood at the forefront, urging the community to remain calm amid the chaos. But his pleas fell on deaf ears as armed citizens began forming their own posses, taking matters into their own hands as they roamed the darkened streets, searching for the shadowy figure that had been stalking them. Though Commissioner Wright acknowledged the reality of some of the gas attacks, he also speculated that the influx of new reports flooding in could be due to panic and hysteria, yet even he admitted that not all of the attacks could be dismissed. On the night of September 10th, a widow named Bertha Benz was abruptly roused from her sleep by strange noises outside her front bedroom window. As she sat up, her heart racing, an unnerving scent began to seep into the room, a sweet gas that clung to the air. The noxious fumes caused her stomach to churn and her head to spin, leaving her with a disorienting sense of lightheadedness. In her state of distress, Bertha called out to her sons, who bolted from their beds in alarm. Just in time, they caught a glimpse of a dark-clad figure fleeing down a nearby back alley, vanishing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. Shaken, the brothers rushed outside to investigate, their eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the intruder. In the soft soil of the flower bed just outside their mother's window, they found the footprints of a woman's high-heeled shoes. On that same night, 4 additional victims fell prey to the gasser, and a legitimate panic began to spread. In response to the escalating crisis, state police and even the FBI arrived to investigate the alarming situation. But once the FBI arrived, things changed. Suddenly, the local police department, which had the day before been actively engaged in the search for the assailant, abruptly shifted their stance. They now cited their inability to find the culprit as proof that no attacker existed at all. In a shocking turn of events, officials now announced that anyone who called the police to report an attack would be taken to the Mattoon Memorial Institution for examination. This decision sent a chill through the community as simultaneously much of the press transformed its coverage. Publications which had been reporting on the attacker suddenly began to mock those who dared to come forward with their experiences. This abrupt change in tone, like that from the police, came almost overnight, leaving victims feeling isolated and helpless. One newspaper, the Mattoon Journal-Gazette, resisted the new narrative imposed on residents. Its editors wrote that it was, quote, an indisputable fact that a Mad Gasser existed. The paper identified, quote, two principal reasons why he was not caught. One is that our police failed to take the case seriously enough at first. The other is that when the police finally decided there was something to it, mass hysteria and outside interference combined to make their efforts unsuccessful. Academia soon weighed in from the comfort of distant cities. Psychologist and lecturer Donald A. Laird effectively sidelined the story when he declared that the entire affair, from start to finish, was the result of mass hysteria. In the December 3, 1944 issue of American Weekly, he stated, quote, "For some reason, women are more susceptible to mass suggestion than men." Laird noted reports of a gasser should be dismissed outright because the majority of such reports came from women, or at least they involved women in some way. He further implied that there couldn't be a real attacker, because if there was one, they would have been caught. The absence of an arrest, he concluded, suggested that no attacker was ever present. Mainstream academia swiftly embraced the mass hysteria theory. In a 1945 issue of the Journal of Abnormal and Social Psychology, Donald Johnson, then a first-year undergraduate at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, conducted an inquiry seemingly based on the premise that the Mattoon gasser was a psychological construct. After interviewing many victims, he asserted, quote, "The case of the phantom anesthetist was entirely psychogenic." By this time, the Journal-Gazette, likely weary of the ridicule that accompanied their previous support for apparent victims of the gas attacks, altered its own position. When the issue of Abnormal and Social Psychology was published, the Journal-Gazette embraced it, referring to the undergraduate Johnson as a professor, without attempting to contact any of the gasser's victims for their perspectives. They also did not seek follow-up commentary from Johnson. Despite the prevailing narrative of mass hysteria, many remained unconvinced by the dismissal of the gasser's existence. The consistency and specificity of the victims' accounts suggested a genuine threat rather than a collective illusion. Numerous individuals reported similar symptoms and experiences independently, making it unlikely that such a wide-ranging phenomenon could be solely attributed to psychological suggestion. Additionally, the physical evidence collected, such as the footprints and pieces of cloth, further supported the notion that something sinister was at play. The late physicist Willie Smith outright rejected the mass hysteria hypothesis. In the 1980s, he wrote, "The best documented cases of mass hysteria have occurred in enclosed spaces, such as workplaces or schools. The contagious behavior usually stems from a single case or trigger event. For the Mattoon case, there was no event that could have triggered a mass hysteria. The three initial incidents, August 31st and September 1st, were real, but had no immediate influence, as they were not publicized until September 2nd. Even then, and in spite of the sensationalist headlines and the extensive newspaper coverage, they failed to generate any new cases until September 5th. To accept the mass hysteria theory, then, one must be willing to alter the concept of what mass hysteria actually is. There is a lesson somewhere in the story of the Mad Gasser, or gassers, of Botetourt County in Mattoon. While the police found, but subsequently denied, evidence of an attacker, the victims' accounts seemed very genuine, as did their injuries. The theory of mass panic caused by hysterical women seems woefully inadequate, though some skeptics still cling to it today, dutifully omitting the part about the women, while insisting 1940s academia can otherwise be trusted as experts on human nature. Other skeptics of a gasser suggest the Mattoon incident was a mass panic caused by the media. Yet many of these same skeptics would bristle at the suggestion that the media should be taken with a grain of salt nowadays. So it seems, either we accept that the Mad Gasser or gassers were real, or we accept the theories of some very problematic academics. Or we accept that it was all the media's fault because they were very irresponsible back then, but are very trustworthy now. Whatever the true answer may be, these stories of mad gassers bring to mind the power, not of mass hysteria, but of fear, and how easily it can spread. Whether the fear in these cases came from a real physical threat or was manufactured by the media, we can't say we know for certain. All we do know with any degree of certainty is that what happened in Mattoon, Illinois and Botetourt County, Virginia, reveals a deeply unsettling truth, that whatever it really was, whatever really happened, could very well happen again.